Hi there, welcome back. Today, we will jump into stories where victims being attacked by animals were caught on camera. From a saltwater crocodile that pulled a vlogger to a content creator who walked towards a cassowary for a selfie, ending her career in the dumbest way ever. June 14th, 2013. Northern India. Heat that sat over the region with still air and no cloud cover breaking it. That was the day Alex Mercer arrived at a point where routine filming stopped being enough as he set out to film Indian leopards, a species known for speed, power, and being extremely fast and unpredictable at close range. Alex was 28, from Birmingham, England. He had been running a wildlife YouTube channel for about 3 years. The content was decent, the editing was clean, and he genuinely cared about animals. But caring about animals and understanding them are two very different things, and that gap is what makes this story so hard to watch unfold. His numbers had plateaued around 40,000 subscribers. He had noticed that the creators getting the most views weren't the ones with the best information. They were the ones with the closest footage. Alex had been playing it safe for 3 years, but this time he decided to take the risk. He decided this India trip was where that would change. The facility was a small private leopard rehabilitation operation, about 45 miles outside a mid-sized city in northern India. A modest, underfunded setup that took in injured or illegally captured leopards and worked to return them to the wild. Small staff, limited resources, and rules that existed mostly on paper. Alex had arranged access through a local contact. For a small fee, he was allowed into the service corridors during the afternoon feeding session. These were narrow passages, about 4 feet wide, running alongside each enclosure. Staff used them to deliver food through slots in the bars. Those slots were wide enough to pass a food tray through. They were also wide enough for a leopard to fully extend a forearm. He was told to stay behind a painted line on the corridor floor and not to crouch near the bars during feeding. He agreed to all of it, and then he slowly stopped doing all of it. In the beginning, he stayed behind the line. The footage was fine, but fine wasn't the goal anymore. He began inching closer to get a better angle. He kept shifting his position to frame the shot differently. By the time the leopard was fully engaged with its food, Alex was inside 3 feet of the feeding bars. Now here is what I think gets missed in stories like this. Alex wasn't being reckless for the sake of being reckless. He genuinely thought he could read the animal. He thought the leopard was focused on the food and not on him. And that belief, that quiet confidence that he had figured out the situation, is exactly what makes the next part happen. The leopard inside was a large male, around 130 pounds, wild caught in the facility for less than a year. It had been eating for about 20 minutes, and I believe it had been tracking Alex's movements through the bars the entire time. Indian leopards are among the most explosive big cats in Asia. They weigh between 80 and 165 pounds, but their forelimbs carry a level of striking power that does not match their size. During feeding, sudden nearby movement can trigger defensive or reactive striking behavior. Their strikes are rapid, short, and violent. One swipe and a retraction. The leopard stopped eating. Head came up slowly, and the strike came with no further warning. The leopard's forelimb shot through the bar gap, and the claws connected across Alex's left shoulder and upper arm in a single, violent swipe. As his body twisted from the impact, the claws raked across the side of his neck during retraction. The neck wound was not the intended target. It was the result of being too close when the strike happened. A second swipe followed almost immediately, catching his right forearm as he raised it. After that, the leopard withdrew, pacing the enclosure wall and striking the bars intermittently, still agitated but no longer reaching through. And this is the part that gets me every time. The whole thing took within a few seconds. That is all it takes. One wrong position, one swipe, and the situation is irreversible. Staff reached the corridor within about a minute and used metal poles and noise to force the leopard back from the bars. Alex was found on the ground with severe injuries to his arm and neck, with heavy blood loss from the neck wound. Pressure was applied immediately while emergency services were contacted. The nearest hospital was over an hour away by road. Despite rapid stabilization attempts, Alex went into shock during transport and died before medical assistance could take over. The recording device was recovered after the incident, but the footage from the attack was unusable due to impact disruption and positioning. The facility chose not to release any material from the incident, citing concerns that it could encourage unsafe access attempts at similar rehabilitation sites. He was not reckless in the way most people imagine when they hear a story like this. He just kept moving forward one small step at a time until the steps ran out. It was July 27th, 2018, at Lake Naivasha in Nakuru County, Kenya, late afternoon. The water looked still. Along the shoreline, thick papyrus reeds and floating vegetation lined the edges. It is a freshwater lake, known for a significant hippopotamus population. Ava Bennett, 19, was from Austin, Texas. She ran a travel vlog on social media with around 2,100 followers. Her content was built around filming herself in unfamiliar places and recording her reactions in real time. She had ridden through heavy traffic in Lagos without a helmet while filming. She had eaten unidentified street food in Hanoi and documented what happened next. Neither had ended badly. Each video had added followers. The pattern was the same every time. Go into something unfamiliar, come out the other side, post it. Lake Naivasha was her third stop on a self-funded East Africa trip. And look, I actually spent time going back through her content when I was researching this case. The Lagos video is genuinely compelling. She had a real eye for it, which is part of what makes this so hard to read. She arrived at the lake in the afternoon and found a small independent vendor near the shore who rented out kayaks. The vendor told her the area near the reeds was not safe for paddling and recommended a guide to take her further out into open water. She declined. She pushed off alone. At established lodges on Lake Naivasha, guests are routinely advised to avoid shoreline vegetation, maintain distance from reed beds, and not enter the water without a guide. Those guidelines exist because hippopotamuses spend the day submerged in shallow water along the edges of the lake, often directly beneath the surface, with no visible sign of their position. And this is the part that gets me. The guide was offered. It was right there. She said no and paddled out alone. Ava paddled toward the densest section of vegetation along the shoreline. There were signs, subtle movement in the water near the reeds, a disturbance that did not match wind or current. She did not interpret them as anything significant. The surface looked calm. She treated it as confirmation. She had entered the animal's space before she understood that it was occupied. Hippopotamuses are among the most dangerous large animals in Africa. They are highly territorial in water and will respond aggressively to anything that enters their space. They spend the day submerged in shallow water, often near reed beds, and typically surface every few minutes to breathe, meaning a large animal can sit directly below a small boat with nothing visible on the surface. A large adult can weigh over 3,000 pounds, with large canine teeth capable of inflicting severe crushing and puncture injuries, and bite force sufficient to crush bone. In water, an encounter can occur without any visible warning, and often with little to no time to react. I have been obsessed with hippo behavior since I covered a river guide case like this a few weeks ago, and what I can tell you is that the reed line is where you never go. Every guide on that lake knows it. Ava just did not have a guide. A caption had been saved on her phone, but not yet posted. It read, "Nature is so peaceful. If you know, you know." She paddled further into the area. Her phone was mounted on the kayak, recording, and this is the part I find hardest to sit with. She was still speaking to her camera when the animal surfaced directly beneath the kayak. The force of it threw the kayak sideways and flipped it. Ava hit the water and came up in the same space as the animal. The hippo drove into her immediately. The first bite closed on her lower torso. The canines drove through soft tissue and into the underlying structure with enough force to fracture the pelvis and damage internal organs on contact. She was pulled under briefly, then released. She surfaced, but could not move. Witnesses on the shoreline saw what happened and raised the alarm. Local responders were contacted and reached the area. She was pulled from the water. She was alive, but her injuries were severe. She was transported to the nearest medical facility. Staff received her in critical condition and initiated emergency intervention, including fluid resuscitation and attempts to stabilize internal injuries. However, the extent of pelvic trauma and internal organ damage, combined with prolonged blood loss and delayed access to advanced surgical care, had already led to irreversible shock. Despite continued efforts, her condition deteriorated rapidly. She was declared dead shortly after arrival. Clinical assessment determined the cause of death to be hemorrhagic shock due to traumatic injuries sustained in a hippopotamus attack. Local authorities documented the incident and reiterated safety guidance regarding shoreline navigation without a guide. The vendor reported that a warning had been given, though this could not be independently confirmed. Ava's body was repatriated to the United States. Her family held a funeral in Austin. Her social media accounts were later archived, and I will say it plainly, nature is so peaceful, but don't get in the bad side of it. Ava did and paid the price.
It was June 9th, 2019, at a wildlife park near Orlando, Florida. Visitors gathered around a demonstration arena to watch trained handlers perform professional alligator wrestling shows. Caso Pedro was 44 years old and worked as a market research consultant in Atlanta, Georgia. He had been sent to Florida by his employer for meetings and was spending his remaining free time at local attractions before flying home. The following day was his 45th birthday. Friends and co-workers described him as outgoing and confident. He was the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately started talking, and he rarely backed down from anything he had already decided to do. Caso attended a professional alligator wrestling demonstration. The trainer explained how dangerous alligators were and described the years of training required before anyone was allowed to work with them. After the show, Caso approached the performer and told him he believed he could do the same thing. The trainer immediately disagreed and explained that alligator handling required extensive experience. Cosil said he had grown up around lakes and rivers. The trainer told him that had nothing to do with it. I think about that conversation a lot. A professional with years of experience telling him directly to his face that he was not qualified. And Caso decided he knew better. That level of confidence is something I genuinely cannot explain. Staff began preparing for the next demonstration. Caso noticed employees were focused elsewhere and climbed over a maintenance gate marked authorized personnel only. Staff shouted for him to stop the moment they saw him on the barrier, but he was already inside. Inside the enclosure was a 9-foot alligator named Gerald. Witnesses recorded him smiling at a camera as he walked toward Gerald. The alligator's head turned, tracking his movement. What people do not understand about alligators is that they require almost no warning time. They are not mammals that build aggression in visible stages. They process a stimulus and they act. Gerald had been trained to work with specific handlers in specific ways. Caso was none of those things. Gerald launched forward, covering the short distance with startling speed. Caso's smile disappeared. He turned to run, but there was not enough time. Gerald's jaws closed on his right leg just below the knee with a bite force that caused catastrophic damage on contact. Witnesses later reported hearing a sharp cracking sound. Caso went down hard onto the concrete. Gerald immediately began dragging him toward the demonstration pool. Alligators pull their targets toward water because that is where they are dominant. Caso's fingers scraped the concrete, trying to find something to grip. Gerald rolled as they reached the edge, pulling him into the water. The rolling continued underwater, worsening the leg injury with each rotation. Caso's head went under. His screaming stopped. Park staff separated Gerald from Caso within moments and pulled him from the water, but the injuries were catastrophic. He was transported to a hospital where surgeons operated for hours. Despite their efforts, he died from massive traumatic injuries and blood loss. Investigators determined that Caso had entered the restricted area after being told he was not qualified. Multiple visitors had recorded parts of the incident on their phones. Those recordings were collected by investigators as evidence. Florida wildlife authorities reviewed them as part of the incident report, and they have not been released publicly. The park also declined to share any of its own surveillance footage, citing the sensitivity of the circumstances and ongoing review by state regulators.
It was October 17, 2018, in the Limpopo region of South Africa. The sun was dropping toward the horizon, and the light over the dry grassland had turned orange and flat. The heat had been sitting over the reserve all day, and even at this hour, it had not let go. The safari vehicle moved slowly along the track, dust rising behind it, the guide keeping the engine low as the Pride came into view beneath a cluster of scattered trees. Rafael Duarte, 23, was a Brazilian TikToker whose online presence had started 2 years earlier with a video filmed in a beach parking lot at night after his girlfriend left him for a local gym instructor. He had paced in front of the camera, ranting about fearlessness and what women respected in men. The video spread because people found it funny. He had not intended to become a minor internet personality, and he had not intended to become a joke, but both things happened at once. He rebuilt his identity around appearing fearless, climbing unfinished buildings, entering abandoned sites, filming dares, but the engagement was dropping and he needed something that would work. The guide briefed the group before the vehicle entered the reserve. Stay inside at all times. Lions are accustomed to vehicles, but not to people on foot. Do not open doors. Raphael listened the way he listened to most safety instructions. That line told me everything I needed to know about what was coming next. The vehicle stopped around 60 feet from the Pride. 3 lions were resting in the shade, tails flicking slowly, bodies relaxed. Other tourists were filming quietly. Raphael watched through his camera and decided it was not enough. The footage looked calm and still, and there was nothing in it that would restore the attention he had been losing for months. He waited until the guide turned to answer a question from another passenger. He opened the side door quietly, stepped out onto the track, and walked several feet from the vehicle with his action camera running. The lions did not move immediately. Raphael recorded himself standing outside the vehicle, commenting on the tourists inside, comparing himself to survival personalities. The lack of immediate reaction confirmed something in his mind that had been confirmed by every previous stunt that had not ended badly. Nothing had moved yet. He was still in control. This is where things went wrong for me reading this. He read the lion not reacting as proof he was safe. That is the last mistake he made. One lion lifted its head. It fixed its gaze on Raphael and held it there. Several seconds passed. Then, the animal rose slowly from its resting position. Its posture shifted. Its movement became deliberate. It began a slow forward advance through the dry grass, eyes locked on Raphael, closing the distance without hurrying. The guide saw Raphael outside the vehicle and began shouting immediately. He revved the engine and ordered everyone to stay seated. Raphael heard the shouting and saw the lion moving and understood that the situation had changed. He did not know whether moving suddenly would trigger a faster response. He hesitated. The lion did not hesitate. It lowered its body into a stalking posture and kept coming. Raphael started stepping backward toward the vehicle. His feet caught on the uneven ground and scattered brush along the track edge. He was watching the lion, listening to the guide, trying to keep the camera steady, and trying to find his footing all at the same time. He stumbled. The lion accelerated. It covered the remaining distance in seconds. Raphael was beside the safari track when it reached him, too far from the vehicle door to get back inside. The lion took him down with the full force of its weight behind the strike, driving him to the ground. The bite closed on his shoulder and upper chest. The animal's canines punctured deep into muscle and tissue, and one tooth caught along the right side of his neck, creating a laceration across the sternocleidomastoid muscle and partially severing the right external carotid artery. The injury was severe, and bleeding was immediate and heavy, but the left carotid remained intact. Raphael lost consciousness from acute blood loss, but remained alive. The guide and remaining staff initiated emergency response procedures immediately, using the vehicle and noise to push the animal back. Emergency services were contacted, and Raphael was airlifted to a hospital in the nearest city. Surgeons worked to address the vascular damage to his neck and shoulder, attempting to repair the severed artery and control the hemorrhage. The surgical team stabilized the vascular injury, but infection set in rapidly during recovery. Sepsis developed within hours and progressed despite aggressive antibiotic intervention and repeat procedures. Raphael died in hospital 68 hours after the attack. The cause of death was recorded as septic shock, secondary to deep cervical laceration with vascular injury, consistent with a large felid attack. Investigators confirmed he had exited the vehicle voluntarily after receiving clear safety instructions. It was August 14, 2018, in the forested outskirts of Predeal, where the tree line thickens fast, and a 24-year-old man spent the last functioning hours of his right arm convinced that what was escalating in front of his camera was content. Gabriel Barbu had roughly 500 followers on TikTok at the time of the incident, built almost entirely on wildlife proximity videos filmed near the Carpathian forest edge. He filmed on evenings and weekends, hauling a mid-range camera and a portable ring light into the brush. His roommates, Costi and Morel, occasionally accompanied him, watching from 33 to 44 yards back. Gabriel's content strategy was simple, and by his own framing in previous videos, deliberate. Leave food at a consistent location near a known bear corridor, return at dusk, film whatever approached. He had been doing this for approximately 6 weeks at the same site, a shallow stream, clearing bordered by beech and spruce, roughly a quarter of a mile from the nearest village road. The same young male brown bear had appeared appeared at the site on at least 9 prior occasions, a fact Gabriel documented and celebrated across multiple uploads primarily on TikTok. Comments on those videos included repeated warnings from Romanian users who recognized the location and the bear's behavior. The slow, unbothered gait, the direct eye contact, the absence of any flight response. Gabriel addressed these in a pinned comment, describing his method as controlled conditioning and noting that the animal had never shown aggression. A wildlife officer from the Brasov Environmental Guard had also posted a public advisory that month warning residents and content creators specifically about bear feeding near Predeal after 2 separate habituation incidents earlier that summer. Based on what I've read, there is no verified evidence of formal enforcement intervention during that 6-week period, though the behavior would typically have been flagged locally under Romanian wildlife regulation. What is verified, though, is that the Carpathian brown bear is the largest land predator in Europe. Adult males in the Brasov region regularly exceed 440 pounds and stand close to 7 feet upright. They are not naturally aggressive toward humans in most contexts, but a habituated bear becomes food conditioned and risk tolerant, not perceiving a human as a threat in the normal sense, but as a predictable source of reward. That evening, friends with him said that they arrived at the clearing at 7:42 p.m. with approximately 40 minutes of usable light remaining. He positioned himself at the stream bank and placed a food pile, bread, fruit scraps, and cooked meat, roughly 2 meters in front of his tripod. The bear arrived within 11 minutes. Gabriel adjusted his framing and, in a decision captured on the recovered footage, pulled the food pile back toward himself to force the animal closer to the lens. The bear followed. He pulled it back a second time. I can understand doing this with a pet dog, but a bear? Come on. On the third repositioning, he held a piece of bread directly in his extended right hand. The bear took it cleanly. He repeated this. On the fourth offering, he withdrew the food a fraction of a second too late, likely to extend the shot. The bear's jaws closed on his forearm, just below the elbow. The grip was immediate and full. Gabriel's reaction shifted within approximately 4 seconds from vocal surprise to something that required no interpretation. The bear shook its head laterally once, then maintained its grip and pulled backward. Gabriel's body came off the ground at the stream bank. His friends didn't know what to do at first, but snapped out of it immediately. Kosti called emergency services. Responders reached the site and located Gabriel 24 yards into the brush. Conscious, but in hemorrhagic shock. He lost the arm below the elbow. He went into cardiac arrest during transport and was pronounced dead before arrival at the hospital. The bear was euthanized 4 days later by wildlife authorities because a habituated bear cannot be safely relocated. Its fear of humans is significantly reduced, and it may repeatedly seek anthropogenic food sources even after translocation. In my opinion, the bear didn't die because it was aggressive, but because Gabriel's reckless conditioning erased its natural fear of humans, forcing authorities to euthanize an animal that was only doing what it had been taught to do. It's a tragic irony that the TikToker's desperate need for content cost him his life, but the real innocent paid with his.
It was July 18, 2016 in South Africa. Roger Mills was 37 years old and lived in Canada. He worked as an accountant and rarely spent time outdoors. He had saved for years to take this safari vacation. The trip was supposed to be relaxing and memorable. When Roger arrived, he checked in and met the guide who would lead the group. The guide explained the safety rules: stay together, listen to instructions, never approach animals without permission. The guide had 12 years of experience. Roger listened, but felt confident he could figure things out on his own. The guide led the group along a marked trail. After about an hour, he stopped the group when a harmless snake wandered onto the path. Using a snake hook, he carefully lifted it, identified the species, and moved it into the bushes. The whole process took less than a minute. I have watched professionals handle things quickly and make it look easy my entire life. And I have learned the hard way that easy to watch and easy to do are 2 very different things. Roger hadn't learned that yet. The group continued. Roger barely paid attention when the guide explained that different species require different handling techniques and that some should never be approached without proper equipment. He had already decided the guide was being overly cautious, the way he felt most rules were written for people who didn't know what they were doing. 2 hours later, Roger spotted a thick-bodied snake coiled beside a rock near the trail. It was not blocking the path. He did not point it out to the guide. While the guide was speaking with other tourists, Roger quietly stepped out of line, handed someone his phone to record, crouched beside the snake, and reached toward it with his bare hand. The snake was a puff adder. Puff adder strikes have been recorded at around 200 milliseconds. The human visual system cannot process movement that fast. By the time Roger's brain registered that the snake had moved, the fangs had already penetrated his palm and withdrawn. He jerked his hand back and stood. For a moment, he may not have understood what happened. Then the pain started. Puff adder venom is cytotoxic. It begins destroying tissue at the bite site almost immediately. Swelling developed around the wound and continued spreading over the following hours, the skin tightening and darkening as the venom moved up his arm. The pain is described by survivors as a deep, spreading burn, unlike anything they had experienced. Roger went pale and grabbed the guide's attention, believing he had been bitten. The guide recognized the species immediately and called for emergency assistance. Medical transport was arranged and Roger was taken to a hospital, where he received anti-venom and underwent surgery for the tissue damage. For several days, doctors fought to stabilize him. The systemic effects of the venom organ stress, tissue destruction, and cascading complications, combined with a secondary infection, proved too much. Roger died in hospital several days after the bite. Investigators found that Roger had left the group and approached the snake without training or equipment in order to film it. Had he alerted the guide, the situation could have been handled safely in under a minute. The video recorded on Roger's phone was reviewed by investigators and held as part of the case record. It has never been released publicly, and the reserve has honored that request.
May 21st, 2015, rural Thailand. The kind of afternoon where the heat just refuses to let go. Humid and still, everything moving a little slower than it should. Maria Kovalenko had been on the property for about 3 hours when things went wrong. Maria Kovalenko was 29, originally from Kyiv, Ukraine. She ran a wildlife tourism and travel channel focused on eco-friendly destinations across Southeast Asia. Her content focused on smaller, lesser-known animal facilities that rarely got any public attention. She had come to Thailand specifically to document a small private facility housing rescued captive tigers, confiscated from illegal trade or unsafe ownership, the kind of place most travel creators ignored entirely. I think about that a lot when I go through this story. Maria was not there to sensationalize anything. She was there because she believed those facilities deserved scrutiny and her audience deserved to see what was actually happening inside them. That instinct was correct. It was also, eventually, the thing that put her in the wrong place. The facility was a small private operation outside a provincial town. It was home to the tigers who had been seized from illicit activities. The owner provided the woman total access to the facility during the afternoon, even explaining the facility's structure to her. She was supposed to watch from here. For safety measures, one of the staff members was also assisting her. By 2:45, the tigers were already pacing. Feeding was at 3. She spent the first hour doing what she came for, shooting the perimeter in sections, noting rust along the lower rails, uneven tension in the chain link, and water buckets that hadn't been consistently refilled. Small maintenance details, the kind that showed how the facility actually functioned day to day, rather than how it was presented. Her camera also captured the same structural issues and maintenance problems in real time. That's when she found the service corridor. It ran between the outer perimeter fence and the enclosure itself, narrow enough that one person could pass through at a time. Staff used it during feeding rounds to access the enclosures directly. The gate had been left unlocked, specifically because feeding preparation was actively underway, a temporary window that would normally close again once staff returned to secure it. It was clearly marked as a danger area, labeled as staff only. Before stepping away to assist with feeding on the other side of the property, the staff member had been direct with Maria. The viewing area was the boundary. Beyond it was restricted and dangerous. She acknowledged it. The staff member left, and she pushed the gate open and walked in anyway. I have spent a long time thinking about what was going through her mind at that moment. The staff member had just told her to stay put. She heard it, and she just did not stop. She was in the middle of filming something she genuinely cared about. It was not defiance. It was not recklessness. It was just momentum. The quiet belief that one step would not change anything. The enclosure fence along the inside of that corridor had a gap near the lower frame where attachment points had pulled away from the post over time. Later, the staff made clear that the problem had already been observed at some point. What was recorded was contested during the investigation process. Indo-Chinese tigers are native to Thailand and much of Southeast Asia. Males typically weigh between 300 and 420 pounds. Their forelimbs are powerful enough to knock large animals off their feet with a single swipe. During feeding periods, captive tigers become highly reactive around enclosure boundaries. The tiger had been pacing the far side. What followed was reconstructed from scene evidence and staff accounts. The tiger moved toward the fence and reached through the gap at the lower frame. As Maria lost her balance and fell sideways against the inner fence, the tiger's claws caught the side of her neck and jaw through the opening. The outer fence was directly behind her, nowhere to go. The contact was brief and explosive, but it was enough to cause catastrophic injury in seconds. I keep coming back to how small that space was, barely wider than a person. 2 fences, a tiger reaching through the bottom of one of them. There was no version of that geometry where she had room to do anything. She just went down in a space that gave her nothing to work with. Staff deployed an air horn. The tiger pulled back. Maria was pulled clear within a few minutes. By that point, she was already in hypovolemic shock from severe neck trauma. She had catastrophic vascular injury, consistent with carotid and jugular rupture, resulting in rapid exsanguination that could not be controlled in the field. She died before reaching the hospital. Provincial investigators conducted an investigation. Unlocked corridor access and the condition of the fence were noted as contributing causes. The facility received punishment and had to make repairs before reopening. I keep thinking about the fact that she spent 3 hours that day documenting everything wrong with that facility. She saw all of it. And then she walked through an unlocked gate next to the most dangerous thing on the property. She was right about every problem she filmed. She just could not see that she had become part of one. Maria's camera had been recording from the main viewing area throughout, but did not capture the attack at a useful angle. Investigators kept the footage. It was never made public. This story is not about a perfect series of invisible failures. It is about someone who saw warning signs and kept moving forward anyway. It was March 14, 2018, on the eastern bank of the Masasa River corridor near Lake Manyara, Tanzania. Bear with me as another TikToker spent the last seconds of her life walking towards something that had already decided she was a threat. Nala Kimaro ran a TikTok account focused on traveling. She had built 3,000 followers over 2 years of safari content, close framing, no fences, the kind of footage that made viewers feel like they were standing in the bush themselves. I'm personally a fan of content like hers, but to be honest, I've never considered the danger behind those videos. For this trip, the guide, Tobias Marima, had already told her twice. Once at the briefing before departure, and once at the water stop 40 minutes earlier when she raised the idea of stepping out near the bank. He refused both times and logged the refusals in the vehicle record. A second tourist on the same vehicle, a retired teacher from Nairobi named Shebet Oluwag, later told rangers that Nala had gone quiet after the second refusal, which she described as the kind of quiet that means someone has already decided something. When Tobias stepped briefly around the rear of the Jeep to radio base camp, Nala exited through the side door during a brief moment when the vehicle was stationary at a permitted viewing pull-off, partially obscured by reeds and engine restart preparations, with her phone mounted on a stabilizer grip. Chebet watched her walk toward the bank. A submerged hippo had been visible for several minutes, just a set of nostrils, and the top ridge of the skull above the waterline, motionless. If you've been a fan of this channel, you know that hippos are not passive animals with a geography problem. They are among the most dangerous large mammals in Africa, responsible for an estimated 500 to 3,000 human deaths annually across the continent. They are highly territorial in and around water and are most dangerous when approached between themselves and the river's edge. And still, Nala stopped approximately 50 to 60 feet from the waterline and tilted her phone up. She was filming. The hippo surfaced in a single, explosive movement. The charge covered the distance in approximately 3 seconds. Witnesses saw the water. There is a single, sharp sound, not a sustained scream. Just one short burst, and then nothing except the noise of water and reeds and the hippo's immediate movement through the bank vegetation. The animal did not continue a prolonged multi-stage attack. Instead, it delivered a rapid sequence of bites and impacts within a brief window of roughly 5 to 7 seconds before disengaging and returning toward the water. Chebet was already screaming toward the radio when Tobias reached the jeep. Rangers from a patrol station arrived and fired deterrent rounds to push the animal back. It took them 40 minutes to reach Nala, and by then she was recovered, partially submerged at the bank edge. The coroner's summary noted massive blunt force trauma to the torso and pelvis, consistent with large animal bite and impact. Cause of death was recorded as traumatic crush injury with secondary hemorrhage. Time of death was estimated within minutes of initial contact. It's tragically unfortunate that Nala ignored a qualified guide's clear, logged warnings, and utterly dumb that she thought a submerged hippo, one of Africa's deadliest animals, would pose for content instead of defending its territory. Afterward, her body was recovered and driven to a small Lutheran mission near Lake Manyara, where she was buried the next day in a simple wooden casket. It was July 21st, 2018, in a Kenyan wildlife reserve near the Masai Mara. The late afternoon light was warm and orange across the dry grassland, and a large elephant herd was moving through a crossing on the dirt road ahead. The dust they raised drifted slowly in the still air. The safari vehicle had stopped to let them pass. Daniela Ferreira, 21, was a travel content creator from Indonesia who had built her following around dance videos filmed in unusual places: airports, rooftops, waterfalls. She described her content as cinematic and dreamlike, and her audience responded to it. She had been brought to Kenya by a small travel company that wanted scenic safari footage for a sponsored campaign. The company wanted harmless tourism content. Daniela wanted one clip that would be different from anything she had posted before. For months, she had been thinking about filming herself, dancing beside wild elephants in open savanna. She believed it would be peaceful and visually powerful, and exactly the kind of thing her audience would share. The guide briefed the group before they entered the reserve. Stay seated, no loud movements, maintain distance from the herd. Elephants with juveniles can become unpredictable very quickly. Daniela listened and then asked if she could step outside briefly to film a dancing clip beside the herd. The guide refused immediately and repeated the warning. Daniela said she would stay close to the vehicle and it would only take a few seconds. She got out anyway with her phone in selfie mode. The guide said no, but she felt she knew better. I've heard that reasoning before, and it never ends the way the person saying it expects. She started filming close to the vehicle. Then she moved slightly to change the angle. Then again, to get more of the herd in frame. She was looking at her phone screen while she moved, and the distance between her and the vehicle grew without her registering it clearly. Her attention was on the composition, not on what the herd was doing. This is the moment that changed everything. The elephants had been crossing normally. Then, one older female stopped. Her ears spread outward. Several trunks lifted into the air. The younger elephants pulled together tightly in the center of the group. A loud cracking sound came from somewhere in the reserve nearby, the kind of abrupt noise that moves through a herd fast. The tension spread through the crossing formation within seconds. The guide saw it and began shouting for Daniela to return immediately. He started the engine and tried to get her attention. The tourists inside the vehicle had already understood that something had changed. Daniela heard the shouting and saw the shift in the herd, but misread it as a dramatic visual moment and backed slightly further into the roadway to keep the whole herd in frame. The matriarch pivoted. The herd broke from a controlled crossing into a panic-driven surge. Dust rose heavily across the road as multiple elephants pushed through at once. Daniela turned toward the vehicle and realized how far she had drifted from it. The ground was uneven and the dust had reduced visibility. The herd was moving across the road between her and the jeep. One adult elephant came through the moving herd and struck her with a lateral movement of its head and tusk as it pushed forward with the momentum of the group behind it. The impact was not a targeted attack. The animal was moving with the herd, and she was in its path. The force of a full-grown elephant moving at speed is several tons of weight in motion. She was thrown sideways onto the road. Her phone landed in the dirt nearby and kept recording. The footage showed dust and violent shaking and shouting from the direction of the vehicles. Safari staff secured the remaining tourists and initiated emergency response immediately. Reserve authorities were contacted, and the crossing area was restricted. Responders reached Daniela on the road. The injuries from the impact were severe, including internal trauma and crush injuries to the chest and torso, consistent with being struck by a large animal at force. She was transported by emergency vehicle to the nearest medical facility. Despite medical intervention, Daniela Ferreira died from her injuries. She was 21 years old. The cause of death was recorded as traumatic internal injuries, consistent with impact from a large elephant during a herd movement event. Investigators later reviewed the recovered phone footage and the guide's account. They concluded Daniela had exited the vehicle voluntarily after being refused permission and warned of the risk, that she had drifted farther from the vehicle while focused on filming, and that the herd's panic response had been triggered by an environmental sound rather than any direct provocation. Her body was repatriated to Indonesia following the investigation.
It was March 24th, 2020, at a safari reserve near Johannesburg, South Africa. Tourists from around the world traveled there to see wild animals in their natural habitat. Gary Thompson was 49 years old and lived in Denver, Colorado. For more than 10 years, he had built a small software company from the ground up, starting in a spare room in his house. By 2016, he decided to sell. After months of negotiations, a larger firm agreed to buy it, giving Gary financial security for the first time in years. To celebrate, he booked a safari in South Africa. After so many years focused on work, he wanted to do something exciting. The safari was his reward. For the first several days, everything went well. Gary photographed elephants, zebras, and giraffes, and appeared relaxed, enjoying telling other tourists about the business he had just sold. He felt like he was finally enjoying life after years of stress. More than once, he mentioned to people in the group that this was the first real vacation he had taken in over a decade. He seemed determined to make the most of every hour of it. On the afternoon of March 24th, Gary joined a guided safari drive. Several tourists sat in an open vehicle while a trained guide drove through the reserve. They came across a large lion resting beside the track and stopped so everyone could take photographs. The lion appeared calm and showed little interest in the vehicle. Gary kept feeling his shots weren't close enough. He told the guide he wanted to get out and photograph from ground level. The guide told him firmly that was not permitted. He explained that lions habituate to vehicles, but a person on foot is a completely different stimulus. Other tourists agreed and told Gary to stay seated. Gary sat quietly for a moment, looking at the lion. Then he reached for the door. The guide repeatedly ordered him to remain inside. Gary stepped down onto the ground anyway. Several tourists shouted for him to get back. The guide kept calling after him. Gary walked toward the lion with his camera raised, apparently convinced the animal's stillness meant it was safe. What Gary did not understand is that resting lion is not a disengaged lion. Lions are ambush predators. Stillness is not passivity, it is patience. The lion's attention shifted immediately to the person on foot. The lion rose to its feet. Its tail moved once, low and slow. Its eyes did not leave Gary. He was perhaps 60 feet away when it began to move. Not an explosive charge, but a fast, low, purposeful sprint that covers ground before a person can process what they are seeing. Gary registered it and turned. He managed 2 steps before the lion caught him. The impact knocked him face first into the ground. Lions kill large prey by seizing the throat or back of the neck, and the lion's jaws found Gary's neck almost immediately. He went still for a moment under the animal's weight, then began struggling, which caused the lion to bite down harder and drag him sideways. The guide used the vehicle horn and tried to close the distance. The lion did not release. It pinned Gary beneath its forepaws and bit again into his shoulder and upper back. His movements grew weaker until he stopped moving entirely. Reserve staff rushed to the area and used noise and vehicles to drive the lion away. Despite their efforts, Gary Thompson died from injuries sustained during the encounter. Investigators determined he had voluntarily exited the vehicle and approached a wild lion in violation of park rules. Other tourists inside the vehicle had been recording throughout the incident. Reserve management retrieved those recordings, and they were reviewed by wildlife investigators and South African authorities. the reserve has declined all requests to release the footage, citing both the graphic nature of the content and the wishes of Gary's family, who have asked that it remain private.
November 9th, 2016, the Carpathian Forest region of Eastern Europe. Ethan Blake had been out here alone for 4 nights already. He was about to find out that he was not nearly as alone as he thought. Ethan Blake was 34, from Portland, Oregon. He ran a wilderness survival channel built around solo expeditions in extreme environments: Alaska, northern Canada, Scandinavia. He had real experience. He knew how to read cold weather, build shelter, and manage food systems in the field. This trip was supposed to be his most ambitious yet, a 14-day solo winter challenge in a remote Eastern European forest with minimal infrastructure and almost no human presence. What Ethan had researched was the climate, the terrain, and the general wildlife picture. What he had not researched was the specific bear behavior in the valley where he set up camp. These trips were not random adventures to Ethan. This was his life's work, the thing he had spent years building toward. People who have never done it do not fully understand what drives someone into a frozen forest alone. But that same drive that needed to push further than anyone else is exactly what put him 100 feet from his tent in the middle of the night in bear country. There were various agricultural communities around the valley that had been using their area to dispose of waste for years, and this had led to an abundant food source for the brown bears found in the area. While these bears remained wild, they were also used to the idea that there was a source of food around humans, and that is the thing that gets me about this one. Solo winter camping in a known bear corridor at the edge of farmland is already a high-risk decision before anything else happens. Ethan's cold weather experience was real, but knowing how to survive a blizzard does not prepare you for what is waiting at your food canister at 2 a.m. His tent was on elevated ground, food stored about 100 feet away in a bear-resistant canister, his headlamp and bear spray within. Reach inside the tent. Correct procedure for most environments. What a canister does not do is stop scent from traveling in cold, still air, and in this valley, the scent did not need to travel far. It was quite peaceful for the first few nights. On the 4th night, however, the canister gave hints that it had been inspected: scraping, movement, touch marks. It was duly recorded by Ethan, who moved the canister just a bit farther and remained in his place. On the 5th night, the activity was sustained, close, and no longer something that could be explained away. He grabbed his headlamp and went out to check. He had done it before on other expeditions without incident, but this time he left the bear spray behind. Brown bears in Eastern Europe typically weigh between 300 and 600 pounds for adult males, with larger individuals in agricultural edge populations sometimes exceeding that range. In the weeks before winter dormancy, they enter hyperphagia, where caloric need increases dramatically and their tolerance for competition near food drops significantly. When Ethan reached the storage area, the bear was already there. He had his camera running, the same way he documented everything on these trips. The headlamp caught the animal in the clearing. He reached for his bear spray and realized it was not on him. He had left it in the tent. The bear charged without extended warning. It surged forward, closing the distance in a blur. It hit Ethan hard enough to knock him off his feet, and he went down on the frozen ground. The attack continued immediately at close range. Heavy strikes and biting aimed wherever it made contact. The camera hit the ground during the initial impact and captured nothing usable after that point. Ethan regained partial consciousness shortly after. He was bleeding in 14-degree air with no one within miles. He crawled toward his beacon, activated it, and lost consciousness again. Search and rescue arrived approximately 4 hours later, delayed by terrain and darkness. He was alive, but in critical condition. He died during evacuation before reaching a medical facility. Investigators noted injuries consistent with bear contact across his upper body, though the full sequence could not be reconstructed with certainty from available evidence. Ethan's camera captured the moment the bear moved over him during the attack. Authorities did not release it publicly, citing the active investigation and consideration for next of kin. He did many things right, but a small moment of carelessness in forgetting his bear spray cost him his life. It was March 14th, 2018, on a narrow strip of uninhabited land about 7 miles off the coast of Krabi, Thailand. It was the kind of place where a satellite phone signal is a luxury and a decision made in the wrong second is permanent. Niran Suksawat was 27, a Thai-born TikToker creator based out of Chiang Mai. His inconsistent miniseries, Blind Drop, operated on a simple premise: a sealed crate of unknown origin, sourced from abandoned storage lots, unclaimed cargo, or rural federal estate clearances was delivered to a remote location, and Neron would open it on camera, inventory the contents, and attempt to survive for 48 hours, using only what was inside. No pre-screening, no safety net. That was the pitch, and it generated moderate traction on TikTok. Now, to help you visualize this, his previous episodes had featured a rusted military surplus drop in Chiang Rai and a flooded warehouse haul in Nakhon Si Thammarat. I think I would actually watch something like this. The crate for the next episode had been sourced through a third-party broker, a sealed field equipment container logged as unclaimed cargo from a rural government depot in Phang Nga province. It had been sitting in a transit warehouse for an unknown period before delivery. Niran had arranged for the crate to be boat shipped to the island location 2 days before filming. He arrived with a single camera operator named Decha Watana, a handheld stabilizer rig, and 4 liters of water. The arrangement was the same as every other episode, except a hidden variable would take everything down. The broker had not inspected the crate's interior. Neither had the warehouse staff. Decha later told investigators that the crate had a slightly warped lower seal when it arrived on the island. Later, investigators also noted signs of rodent infestation on the crate. The lower seal had sustained recent damage consistent with prior transport handling. Neron began opening the crate at approximately 2:10 p.m. Decha's camera captured the inventory in real time. Corroded field tools, 2 canvas bags, a sealed tin container, a folded tarpaulin. Neron reached into the larger canvas bag with his right hand. The bag shifted. A king cobra, which had likely entered the crate during storage and remained concealed in the canvas after becoming accidentally trapped when the container was sealed, struck once at the back of his right hand. King cobras are the longest venomous snakes on Earth, with adults regularly reaching 10 to 13 feet, with rare individuals exceeding 14 feet, and capable of delivering a venom yield per strike that can cause fatal neurotoxic effects in large mammals. Their venom is neurotoxic. It does not destroy tissue at the bite site, but moves systemically, dismantling nerve signal transmission until the diaphragm can no longer contract. Death, when untreated, comes from the inability to breathe. The footage shows him dropping the bag and stepping back hard into the crate's edge, knocking it sideways. Decha briefly hesitated, but kept filming, adjusting his grip as the stabilizer dipped. Niran looked at his hand. The bite marks were small, 2 punctures, barely bleeding. He shook his hand once, then stopped moving for approximately 4 seconds while looking toward the camera operator, who did not immediately speak. And when the severity of the situation sank in, Decha called emergency services. However, the nearest response vessel was 40 minutes out under standard conditions. It arrived in 63 minutes due to sea chop. Needless to say, Niran was non-responsive when they reached him. Death was attributed to respiratory failure, secondary to neurotoxic envenomation, consistent with a king cobra bite. No anti-venom administered prior to death. The time from bite to death is estimated at almost 2 hours. It's deeply unfortunate that Niran's compelling, creative concept, one that many viewers, myself included, would genuinely have watched, ended not because of a calculated risk, but because he was unlucky. In the aftermath, Decha transported his body back to Krabi, where a simple Buddhist ceremony was held at a small mainland temple before. Niran was cremated, as is Thai custom, with his ashes later scattered over the very same stretch of sea that had been too slow to save him. What they filmed never saw the light of day.
It was March 12th, 2014, off the coast of the Bahamas. The weather was clear and the sea was calm as dozens of tourists gathered at a marina for snorkeling excursions to nearby coral reefs. Kim Min-jun was 29 years old and lived in Seoul, South Korea. He worked as a marketing specialist and had recently started a travel-focused social media channel. He only had a few thousand followers but was determined to create content that would grow it faster. The trip to the Bahamas was supposed to give him that material. He had planned the excursion carefully, hoping to film something dramatic that would stand out. That morning, Kim joined a guided snorkeling tour. Before departure, the guides conducted a detailed safety briefing. Stay within the designated area, remain close to the group, follow directions immediately if conditions changed, and do not swim into deeper water beyond the reef. Kim listened while preparing his waterproof action camera on an extension pole. Shortly after arriving at the reef, the group entered the water. For the first 20 minutes, everything went smoothly. Tourists filmed fish, coral, and sea turtles in the clear water. And I think about those 20 minutes, everything working exactly as it should. Kim getting his footage, the water calm and bright. And then he looked out toward the deeper water and decided it wasn't enough. Kim noticed larger fish swimming farther from the reef and gradually moved away from the group. A guide noticed and blew a whistle several times. Kim looked toward the boat and briefly raised his hand. The guide later said he appeared to understand the instruction but continued swimming away. Crew members moved the boat toward him while repeatedly signaling him to return. The distance kept increasing. The further he got from the reef, the more the environment changed. Shallow reef water is bright and full of structure. Open, deeper water is different. Visibility drops, the color shifts to darker blue, and a person swimming alone at the surface, kicking, moving, trailing bubbles from a camera mount creates a sensory profile very different from the fish around the reef. Motion, vibration, irregular rhythm. These are the things that draw investigation from large predators. Shortly afterward, a large shark rose from the deeper water beneath him. Sharks of this kind are known to approach and investigate before an encounter escalates, and what happened next may have begun that way. There was almost certainly no visible warning from Kim's perspective. Sharks often approach from below, using the surface contrast to silhouette their target. The first contact was a violent strike to his torso that knocked him sideways and likely caused immediate disorientation. Kim thrashed, a response that is instinctive and understandable, and deeply counterproductive, because irregular surface movement reinforces further investigation. The shark came back. Its jaws closed on his right arm and shoulder and pulled him downward. The camera pole was still in his hand. He twisted and fought. The shark released briefly, then bit again into his side. The lacerations from a shark of that size open tissue to the bone. Blood displacement in open water is near instantaneous. Kim went under. When guides reached him, he was face down at the surface, severely injured. They pulled him aboard immediately. Emergency first aid was administered while the vessel returned to shore at full speed. Paramedics were waiting at the marina and transported Kim to hospital for emergency treatment. Despite rapid intervention, he died from the injuries he had sustained. Investigators reviewed footage from tourists and crew. The recordings showed Kim moving beyond the supervised area despite warning signals. Investigators concluded the evidence was consistent with a shark attack involving a large species known to inhabit those waters. The tour company's own camera systems captured parts of the incident from the boat. That footage was submitted to Bahamian maritime authorities and reviewed as part of the investigation. It was not released to the public. Authorities cited the ongoing nature of the inquiry and the sensitivity of the content. Kim's family, based in South Korea, later confirmed through a representative that they did not want any footage or recordings related to his death distributed online or through media.
It was March 18th, 2018, in the Northern Territory of Australia. The afternoon was fading, and the riverbank was quiet in the way that remote places are quiet. Not peaceful exactly, just empty of anything human. The mangroves pressed in close on both sides, and the water between them was dark and gave nothing back. Nguyen Minh, 26, had come from Vietnam with a tripod, 2 camera bags, and a plan that made sense to him in the way plans make sense to people who have never had one go badly wrong. His channel had started by accident. A video of him nearly slipping off a waterfall in Dalat had gone viral without warning. Comments calling him fearless. Sponsorship money that helped his parents. The earlier video had taught him the wrong lesson. Surviving danger had started to feel like understanding it. That is the sentence I stopped at. Surviving something and understanding it are not the same thing. That gap is what brought him to that riverbank. But as time went by, the numbers were down. Newer creators were filming things that made his content look cautious by comparison, and his audience had noticed. He had been watching Australian crocodile jump videos for weeks. Clips of saltwater crocodiles launching vertically from the water towards suspended bait. He told his followers he was going to film the closest crocodile jump ever recorded. He believed the gap between what looked dangerous and what actually was dangerous was something he could manage. He arrived at the river system and walked past the designated tourist platforms without stopping. I need to point this out. The safe version of exactly what he wanted was right there. Steel mesh. Proper positioning. He walked past it and kept going for nearly a mile. They were reinforced with steel mesh and positioned well back from the water. He kept going, nearly a mile into a restricted area marked with warning signs, until he found a section of bank that felt right. The ground was mangrove root and mud that stayed wet regardless of the sun. He tested the footing twice before setting up and convinced himself it was stable enough. He positioned his tripod near the waterline and began his live stream. The stream quality dropped repeatedly as the connection weakened near the river system. Viewers later reported the feed freezing several times before anything happened. The water was flat and nothing happened. Chat messages came in, accusing him of staging it. His feet were on a moss-covered root above the mud, and his eyes were on his phone screen. A wildlife ranger named Daniel was on patrol nearby when he spotted movement along the restricted bank. At first, he assumed someone was illegally baiting crocodiles for footage. He saw the tripod and the rope with bait hanging above the water, and as he got closer, he understood the full situation. He left his vehicle and ran toward the bank, shouting for men to move back. By the time the crocodile surfaced, there was almost no time left to react. Min tried to pull back. His foot slipped. He reached for a tree trunk nearby and briefly caught it, but his weight had already moved past the point where catching anything would help. He went forward and down toward the water. The crocodile took him by the torso at the waterline. The bite closed with enough force to fracture several ribs and compress the chest cavity on contact. The animal immediately initiated a death roll, rotating its body violently in the water to destabilize and submerge its target. The rolling motion caused catastrophic internal injuries and drove him below the surface. A saltwater crocodile of that size generates enough rotational force to tear through muscle and bone. He would not have remained conscious for long after the initial bite. Mercer reached the bank within seconds and initially believed Min had surfaced farther down the bank. He searched the shoreline for several seconds before realizing he was gone. The cause of death was later recorded as traumatic internal injuries and drowning consistent with crocodile attack. The combination of the initial bite, the death roll, and submersion meant survival was not possible after the first seconds of contact. The live stream had kept recording through the freezes and the signal drops. Recordings spread across platforms within hours. Nguyen Min was pronounced dead at the scene. His body was recovered the following morning. His camera equipment was still on the bank where he had positioned it. One of the camera batteries was still charging through a portable power bank when investigators recovered the equipment. Investigators concluded he had deliberately entered a restricted area, ignored multiple warning signs, and misjudged how quickly the crocodile could close the gap. The safety margin he believed he had did not exist. It was April 12th, 2018, at a private animal facility in Crossville, Tennessee. Early evening, the light dropping, the property quiet except for the sounds of the animals. The facility sat on approximately 4 acres off a rural road and housed a number of large and exotic animals, including 2 Bengal tigers, a black bear, and several exotic birds. It was not a zoo. It was privately operated and open to visitors on a limited basis. Dylan Mercer, 31, had been keeping exotic animals for years before he started filming. He had developed his understanding of the animals through ownership and daily contact, not through formal training or professional certification. He knew the animals on his property the way someone who has lived with them for years knows them, through habit, pattern, and personal experience. That familiarity was real. It was also the basis of his confidence. And confidence built through familiarity without formal training has a particular kind of blind spot. And look, I want to be fair about this. Living with an animal for years is not nothing. That experience is real. The problem is that it can make you feel like you understand something that has never fully shown you what it is capable of. He started posting content about exotic animal care and handling. His early videos were advice-based, how to approach certain animals, how to read their behavior, what ownership actually looked like day to day. The tone was straightforward and the knowledge felt firsthand. His following grew slowly. Then one video performed far beyond anything he had posted before. The comments and shares came quickly. He watched the numbers and understood what that meant. And this is the part that gets me, because I have covered cases like this before, and this moment, the moment one video blows up and resets your understanding of what your audience wants, is the moment everything changes. After that, the content shifted. Less advice, more demonstration. Less explaining, more showing. He began documenting his direct interactions with the animals on the property, particularly the tigers. The closer the interaction, the stronger the response. Viewers kept coming back to see what he would do next. The channel had approximately 4,800 followers by April 2018. The facility operated under an exhibitor license. Recent inspections had noted minor citations related to facility compliance. One of the tigers, a 4-year-old male named Raja, appeared in his content regularly. Dylan referred to the animal in videos and on stream as his boy. He described Raja as manageable, as an animal that knew him, as something different from what people imagined when they thought of a tiger. Raja weighed approximately 420 to 480 pounds. What gets me about that description, his boy, is that Dylan genuinely meant it. He believed it, and that belief is exactly what made the enclosure feel like somewhere he could walk into. On a previous stream, Dylan had mentioned that Raja had not been fed that day as part of the facility's feeding schedule, noting a minor supply delay. At approximately 7:14 p.m. on April 12th, Dylan began a live broadcast from the facility. He moved around the property while the audience grew. By 7:31 p.m., the viewer count had increased steadily. He told the audience he was going to go in with Raja. He had done this on camera before. The audience had seen it. Some of them were there specifically because they expected it. And this is where it starts to get deeply uncomfortable. Because Raja had not been fed. Dylan knew that. He entered the enclosure through the service gate, still holding his phone. Bengal tigers are large ambush predators. In the wild, they close distance on prey quickly and without warning, using explosive acceleration over short distances. The forelimb strike is the primary disabling mechanism. A single blow from a fully grown Bengal tiger is capable of breaking bone and immediately destabilizing an animal larger than a human. The bite that follows is positional and sustained. Dylan stepped inside. Raja hadn't been fed for roughly a day due to a supply delay, something Dylan knew. It wasn't long enough to make the animal desperate, but it was enough to put him out of routine. And it was already the time of evening Raja associated with feeding. Instead of waiting for that to be resolved, Dylan went in anyway, choosing to film while the animal was already keyed into that expectation. He entered the enclosure while waiting for the feed to arrive, the first. Contact was a forelimb strike, directed at the upper body. Dylan went down, the bite followed. Raja held the grip, repositioning once, in a way that wildlife professionals described as consistent with control behavior seen when large felids subdue prey. And this is the moment I find hardest to process. The audience watched it happen in real time. Several of them contacted emergency services during the stream. They were the ones who made the call. They reached the enclosure in minutes. First responders had already secured the area and isolated the animal before entry was possible. Dylan was located inside the enclosure, unresponsive. Paramedics initiated assessment immediately, but there were no signs of viable cardiac or respiratory function on arrival. Given the extent of traumatic injuries, resuscitation efforts were not initiated. He was pronounced dead at the scene at approximately 7:52 p.m. Clinical assessment determined the cause of death to be catastrophic traumatic injuries, consistent with a large felid attack, including blunt force impact and penetrating bite trauma. The facility was closed pending investigation. State authorities reviewed the incident and confirmed that the animal's behavior was consistent with a feeding response. Raja was euthanized the following day in accordance with safety protocol for large carnivore attacks. The exhibitor license was suspended during the review. Dylan's online accounts were taken offline shortly after. His family held a private service. One fact I can't deny is the animal did exactly what a hungry 400-pound tiger does when a person walks into its space at feeding time, and it paid for that with its life too. It was September 14, 2018, on Rinca Island in Komodo National Park, Indonesia, and the feeding platform smelled of raw goat and standing heat, the kind of stillness that precedes something permanent. Dimas Santoro was 24 and had spent 4 years around private reptile collections near his home, experience he treated as expertise. Staff at the Rinca site described him as attentive but overly eager, constantly pushing boundaries for content on his TikTok account. He had been volunteering at the feeding site for 11 days, assigned only to document feedings from a marked safe zone behind the barrier under ranger supervision. He was not authorized to participate or handle feeding equipment. Days earlier, he told a colleague that a feeding live stream with a wild Komodo dragon would boost his following. He arrived carrying a tripod, a handheld camera, and an aluminum meat hook pole that was not park issued or approved inside the enclosure zone. I think all of you are familiar with Komodo dragon. They are the largest living lizards on Earth, with adult males on Rinca regularly exceeding 9 feet and 150 pounds. Their mouths carry over 50 bacterial strains, and venom glands produce anticoagulant compounds that prevent blood from clotting. They do not telegraph aggression in obvious ways, but they do display warning behaviors such as hissing, rigid posture, and low tail tension before striking. That morning, the site coordinator noted 2 dragons near the feeding area. Now, according to interviews, Dimas was portrayed as charismatic, and that's probably why they told Dimas and the 2 staff members present to keep the session short and maintain spacing. If that was me, I would have hauled him out of there. Demas had heard it, and yet, according to the staff, he still made a light comment about being overly careful. Demas stood at the eastern platform railing, pole extended, lowering goat meat toward the first dragon 8 feet below. A second dragon had entered the frame's peripheral zone 4 minutes in, approaching from behind along the platform base. Staff were present, but focused primarily on the first dragon, and did not maintain continuous visual sweep of the full perimeter. Moments later, Demas crouched and reached his right hand down to reposition the meat on the hook. The second dragon, still not visible on camera, lunged upward from below the platform edge and clamped its jaws around his right wrist. Komodo teeth are recurved and serrated, designed to hold rather than release. The initial bite drove through the dorsal tendons and into the joint. He pulled his arm back hard. The dragon initially held, then readjusted its grip rather than maintaining a single continuous clamp, pulling with equal force and not fully releasing. Each second of resistance widened the wound. For roughly 30 seconds, he was standing motionless at the railing, arm extended downward at an unnatural angle. A handler reached him within seconds and struck the dragon's mid-body with a pole. It released. However, the bleeding was immediate and heavy. Dark, spreading fast across the platform boards, staff applied direct pressure and began moving him toward the boat dock. A staff member called the Park Emergency Line at 10:31 a.m. The evacuation boat left Rinca at approximately 10:55. Medical care was reached on Flores Island just under 1 hour later, and for the severity of his injury, that was a fatal window. Demas knew the risk and made a calculated bet that closer proximity would produce better TikTok content. What's frustrating isn't the single moment. It's 11 days of small boundary violations that nobody stopped, each quietly becoming the new baseline. The system around him kept letting the inch slide. That's how these situations build, and exactly why they keep happening.
It was July 21st, 2021 in Yellowstone National Park. Summer was one of the busiest times of the year, and thousands of tourists had come to see waterfalls, mountains, and wildlife moving through the landscape. Tommy Price was 31 years old and lived in Montana. He enjoyed traveling and posting videos online and was always looking for ideas that would get people talking. Before his trip, he bought a realistic bear costume with a plan to film funny videos near landmarks around the park. Friends laughed when he showed them, and Tommy became more excited. The first day went well. He filmed some harmless clips and had fun. The views were decent, but not spectacular. He kept refreshing the numbers on his phone that evening, watching them stay flat. And by the next morning, he was already thinking about what he could do differently. On the second day, Tommy and friends stopped at a wildlife viewing area where a grizzly bear had been spotted feeding in an open meadow. Dozens of tourists were already there. Rangers and warning signs reminded visitors to stay far back. Tommy had the bear costume in his bag from earlier. He told his friends it would be funny to put it on and walk toward the real bear, that the combination would get more attention than anything else he had filmed. His friends told him not to. Several other tourists warned him as well. There were strangers in that crowd who had never met him and still tried to stop him. I think about that. Even people who owed him nothing could see exactly where this was going. Tommy put on the costume and left the viewing area. Rangers stationed nearby began moving toward him, repeatedly ordering him to stop. At first, the bear kept feeding and paid little attention. Tommy kept moving forward. The costume was not what made this dangerous. The danger came from a person deliberately closing the distance to a wild grizzly bear while it was feeding. Bears tolerate distant observers. A human entering their space is a different situation entirely. That is why the recommended distance is hundreds of feet. The grizzly lifted its head. Bears have an exceptional sense of smell and had likely registered his presence long before it looked up. What changed was the distance. Tommy had crossed the threshold. The bear could no longer ignore. Its body went rigid. It turned to face him and charged. A grizzly in a full charge covers ground at roughly 35 miles per hour. Tommy had no realistic chance of running. The bear hit him with its full mass. Adult grizzlies in Yellowstone regularly exceed 500 pounds, and the impact launched him off his feet. Before he could move, the bear's jaws closed on his shoulder and drove him flat against the ground. It shook him once, violently, the way a dog shakes a toy. That single motion caused severe damage to his neck and upper spine. The bear mauled him briefly before backing away once it no longer perceived him as a threat. Tommy lay motionless. Witnesses were still screaming for him. Rangers responded within minutes. Despite their efforts, his injuries were catastrophic. Tommy Price died from the attack. Authorities recorded his cause of death as fatal traumatic injuries consistent with a grizzly bear attack. Investigators determined he had deliberately approached the bear, despite repeated warnings, and that the bear had reacted defensively after he entered its space while feeding. Several bystanders recorded the approach and the attack. That footage was submitted to park authorities and reviewed as part of the investigation. Yellowstone officials confirmed the recordings exist, but have not released them publicly, stating that doing so would not serve any educational purpose and would cause unnecessary distress to his family. The family has made the same request.
It was October 11th, 2016, in a private conservancy bordering Tsavo West National Park in Kenya. Caleb Mercer had built his entire career on not backing down. October 11th was the day that stopped working. Caleb was a travel filmmaker who had built his following around one specific thing: proximity. Not the kind of wildlife content shot from a safe distance with a long lens, the kind where you could feel how close he was. He worked independently, traveling with just a local guide who handled driving, navigation, and access to smaller private routes and remote corridors that larger documentary crews never reached. His audience followed him because he made danger look manageable. That was the product. That was also a lie. By 2016, his content had started crossing a line as he had begun openly mocking standard safari safety rules in his videos. Distance restrictions, vehicle positioning guidelines, the advice guides gave about not approaching certain animals in certain conditions. He treated all of it as a theater designed for nervous tourists. And that's the part that really concerns me. When someone with a following tells their audience that safety rules are exaggerated, people believe them. They watch the video, they see nothing bad happen, and they file it away as proof. Some of them will go on a safari one day. Some of them are kids who will grow up thinking that is how you interact with wild animals. Wildlife does not care about your subscriber count. Silence is not permission. An animal that has not reacted yet is not an animal that will never react. The dry season that year had been severe. Water sources were shrinking, and wildlife had been pushed into tighter corridors near the conservation boundary. Local trackers had flagged something specific before Caleb's crew went out that afternoon. Several adult male elephants in the area were in must, a hormonal state that causes a dramatic shift in behavior. Aggression increases, tolerance drops, and the animal becomes unpredictable in ways that even experienced trackers treat with serious caution. The crew was specifically warned to avoid lone males near narrow brush corridors and water access routes. Caleb heard the warning, but chose to proceed anyway. When they located the elephant late in the afternoon, the guide read the situation immediately. Dark secretions were running down the side of its face from the temporal glands. The animal was rumbling and repeatedly spreading its ears toward the vehicle. These are not subtle signals. They indicate heightened agitation and increased aggression, with a significantly lowered threshold for charging. The guide advised leaving immediately. I want to stop here because this is the moment that defines everything that follows. The guide was not being overly cautious. He was reading an animal that was already showing serious warning signs in a narrow corridor with no easy exit. Caleb looked at the same situation and saw an opening shot for his next video. African bush elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult males weighing between 10,000 and 13,000 pounds and standing up to 10 feet tall at the shoulder. In active must, their aggression threshold drops significantly, and they have been documented charging vehicles and reacting aggressively when they perceive an obstacle or threat. Their tusks and feet alone can cause catastrophic damage in seconds. Caleb leaned out of the open side of the vehicle with his stabilized camera rig, trying to maintain a close frame on the elephant while narrating to his audience about how safari warnings were often exaggerated. The guide remained focused on driving, prioritizing positioning and the escape route rather than filming. The elephant rushed toward the vehicle at full speed and struck the side with its head and tusks. shaking it violently. The impact and sudden vehicle movement caused him to lose his grip and fall from the side of the vehicle onto the ground beside it. In the dust and confusion, he ended up in the elephant's path as it continued its charge. He was struck and stepped on during the elephant's forward movement, resulting in catastrophic, crushing injuries. The guide attempted to reposition the vehicle, but the situation unfolded too quickly to intervene. After moving a short distance, the elephant slowed and eventually turned away into the bush. The remoteness of the location meant emergency responders could not reach the area quickly. Caleb died at the scene from crushing injuries and massive internal trauma. Wildlife investigators later concluded the attack was entirely consistent with documented musth behavior in a stressed elephant that had been repeatedly provoked and obstructed at close range. The animal had displayed multiple warning behaviors before committing to the charge. Officials noted it was not acting predatorily. It was reacting defensively to something it perceived as a direct challenge in a confined space. The recorded footage was reviewed as part of the investigation. It captured the warning displays, Caleb's approach, and the moment the charge began. Authorities did not release it publicly, citing the graphic nature of the footage and the risk of encouraging similar behavior among other independent filmmakers working in wildlife areas. It was October 3rd, 2018, in a third-floor apartment on Ulica Positano in Sofia, Bulgaria, where TikTok livestream viewers were about to watch a preventable death unfold through a phone screen. Mira Nikolova worked days at a print shop and streamed on TikTok with exotic reptile content late at night when her numbers were highest. I think it's worth noting that she had no formal training, no handling license, and no legal permit for any of the animals in her apartment, which had already drawn prior attention from local animal control complaints. Additionally, her reputation was built on proximity, opening enclosures on camera, moving animals by hand, responding to viewer pressure with the kind of ease that reads as expertise to anyone who doesn't know the difference. Her centerpiece was a black mamba, which was believed to be sourced through an informal exotic animal trading network operating across Eastern Europe. Now apparently, streams featuring it consistently pulled 2 to 3 times her average viewership. Black mambas are named for the ink-black interior of their open mouth, not their scales, which are olive gray. Adults reach 8 to 9 feet and carry a neurotoxic venom that, without treatment, can kill an adult human in under 45 minutes. They are reactive animals that respond to enclosure stress and sudden exposure with no readable warning, and boy did Mira hit all the check marks. Roughly 40 minutes into the stream, she opened the enclosure to reposition the animal closer to the front panel for better lighting. The mamba struck her right hand before her arm had fully entered the space. She pulled back and held the hand against her chest. Now here's where it gets crazy. She told the stream it might be a dry bite, 2 small puncture marks, minor bleeding at the entry points. Additionally, she said that she'll call emergency services later and that she got time before symptoms get serious. And sure enough, within minutes, her speech began to slow, enough that multiple viewers clipped the timestamp. Moments later, she was seated against the wall beneath the terrariums, both hands trembling with a fine, sustained irregularity visible on the wide-angle feed. She attempted to stand twice. Both attempts ended the same way, a slow descent back down the wall, not a drop, but a coordination failure, each movement slightly less controlled than the last. Salivation was visibly increasing. Her breathing became audible through the microphone. Each inhale slightly incomplete, each exhale slightly longer, and 50 minutes later, she was on the floor, back to the wall, legs extended. The stream was still running. Viewers contacted emergency services in Sofia. Confirming the address took time. She had never disclosed her location publicly, with several callers only able to provide partial identifiers from the live stream overlay rather than a verified physical address. The landlord was reached separately. Emergency response arrived over an hour after the bite. That was way too late. She had died minutes before. Coroner findings recorded acute respiratory failure, secondary to neurotoxic envenomation, consistent with black mamba bite, with neuromuscular paralysis as the primary mechanism. Time from bite to death was estimated at under 55 minutes. No antivenom was administered prior to cardiac arrest. Local authorities later seized the apartment and confirmed multiple unlicensed exotic reptiles were being kept in unsafe conditions, prompting an investigation into illegal wildlife trafficking trafficking channels in the region. After multiple flags, the platform took down the video. In my opinion, Mira understood the risk better than she let on. What she never accounted for was the difference between knowing something is dangerous and actually believing it will happen to you. That gap closed in under an hour, on camera, while thousands of people watched, and almost nobody moved fast enough to matter. It was October 13th, 2018, a campground near Great Smoky Mountains, National Park, Tennessee. A Saturday evening in autumn, the air cold and smelling of damp leaves and wood smoke, flashlight beams moving between tents and RVs across the gravel roads. Ethan Walker was 20 and had lost 3 jobs in less than 3 years. At a hardware store, he had climbed shelving instead of using the rolling ladder and knocked boxes into a customer walkway. At a car wash, he had reversed a customer's truck across wet pavement without a manager present and clipped a metal station. At a barbecue restaurant, he had ignored a warning about a slippery kitchen floor, stacked too many trays, and nearly collided with a coworker carrying hot equipment. Each time he had been told clearly what the rule was. Each time he had decided the rule did not apply to him. Each time something had gone wrong, he had found a reason why it was not really his fault. He had started posting videos online. Most of them went nowhere. Then, during a trip to the Smokies in early 2018, he filmed himself climbing a roadside barrier to approach a wild elk while a park employee shouted at him to move back. The elk ignored him and kept grazing. The video spread. Thousands of strangers called him fearless. Ethan replayed the comments for days. For the first time in a long while, attention felt easy. 3 jobs, 1 viral video, and the comments that followed changed everything about how he saw himself. I wish the elk had reacted differently that day. After that, the content changed. Fences, drop-offs, wildlife. By October 2018, he had around 5,600 followers. Not enough to live on, but enough to dominate his attention. The camping trip that weekend had been planned mostly around content. Friends were asked to repeat reactions for better footage. Hiking clips were filmed multiple times. Rangers had spent the weekend reminding campers to secure food and stay at least 150 feet from bears after several sightings near garbage areas earlier in the week. Black bears are highly motivated by high-calorie rewards. Once a bear associates humans or campgrounds with easy food like trash, they become habituated, losing their natural fear of people, which significantly increases the risk of a defensive or predatory encounter. That Saturday evening, a black bear had been spotted near overflowing trash bins deeper inside the campground. The bear was partly turned away, head lowered towards scattered food and garbage, moving slowly. Ethan pulled out his phone almost automatically. One friend laughed nervously and told him he was actually insane. Another kept filming from further back and told him he was already close enough. Ethan kept walking. He stopped briefly to check his screen and make sure both his face and the bear were visible in the frame. 6 feet from a bear, and he stopped to check his framing. His phone was making the animal look further than it was. Every single thing in that moment was working against him. The bear had not reacted aggressively. To Ethan, that seemed reassuring. He moved closer. The bear shifted slightly beside the bin. Ethan interpreted the movement as proof the animal was used to people. Behind him, a friend told him more seriously to back up now. Ethan hesitated, but did not turn around. Too many people were watching behind him, and he was still recording. The bear lifted its head fully. The laughter behind Ethan stopped. The animal focused directly on him. The distance had closed to roughly 15 feet. The bear charged. It covered the gap instantly and made contact before Ethan could move. The initial strike knocked him off his feet. The bear bit into the right side of his neck and shoulder, the force of the jaw crushing the soft tissue and compromising the carotid artery. It drove him into the ground, pinning him by his chest. He had no time to cover himself and nothing to grab onto. His phone was still recording when it hit the ground beside him. Friends screamed. Someone ran for the ranger station. Someone else shouted and threw something toward the animal. The bear disengaged after several seconds and moved back toward the tree line. Rangers reached the scene within minutes. Ethan was unconscious and in profound hypovolemic shock due to rapid blood loss from the neck wounds. Bystanders had attempted to apply pressure, but the depth of the lacerations and the damage to the major vessels made the bleeding difficult to control in a field setting. Emergency responders initiated CPR and maintained advanced life support measures while transporting him to the nearest clearing for air evacuation. However, the physiological toll of the blood loss, combined with the trauma to the cervical spine during the initial strike, resulted in cardiac arrest during transit. Ethan was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the University Medical Center in Knoxville. The bear was tracked and euthanized the following morning. It was a young male that had been feeding on unsecured campground garbage for several days prior to the incident. The footage from Ethan's phone was reviewed as part of the park's incident report. The video showed him continuing to advance after 2 verbal warnings from his friends, and after the ranger advisory that evening had specifically addressed bear proximity. The park noted that the distance at the point of charge was consistent with a provoked defensive response at close range. No charges were filed. The incident report was added to the park's public safety record. The campground garbage management protocols were reviewed and updated the following season.
It was the afternoon of May 14th, 2022, on the Zambezi River in Zimbabwe. The weather was warm, the water looked calm, and several tourists were taking part in a guided river tour before heading home from their safari vacations. Janet Mills was 44 years old and lived in Dallas, Texas. She worked as an office manager for a small construction company and had been married for more than 20 years. Earlier that year, she won a promotional safari vacation package through a local radio station giveaway. It was the biggest prize she had ever won, and she could not stop talking about it. A few weeks before departure, her husband suffered serious health problems and was admitted to hospital. Doctors performed a liver transplant. The recovery was difficult, and for a period, he remained unconscious while doctors monitored him around the clock. Family members told Janet to stay in Texas until his condition improved, but her younger sister offered to visit the hospital every day. Several relatives still felt she should not leave. In the end, she chose the trip and told family she would stay in constant contact. For several days, the vacation went well. She photographed elephants, giraffes, and zebras, and called home regularly. Each call told her he was stable. Then, on the morning of May 14th, the hospital called her. Doctors informed her that her husband's condition had become critical. I want to be honest about something. I have no idea what I would do in that situation, but I know that phone call would have made it impossible to think about anything else for the rest of that day. Janet's flight was already scheduled for the following day. Most people would have stopped everything and focused on getting home. Janet decided to join a guided river tour that afternoon instead. The Zambezi River was one of the last items on her itinerary, and she had been looking forward to it since she first saw the trip details. In her mind, she was one boat ride away from being done. Several tourists began recording when the boat docked near a closed river crossing. The guide was explaining why the area had been shut down. Janet had mentioned several times that she needed to stay on schedule. While the group watched, she noticed a local man crossing roughly 200 yards upstream and questioned why tourists were not allowed to do the same. The guide explained that the local man knew the specific safe crossings unmarked points that tourists had no way of identifying. Janet believed crossing would save time. While the guide was attending to another passenger, Janet stepped off onto the bank and waded in. By the time anyone noticed, she was already several yards in. Passengers began shouting. Their cameras stayed pointed at the river. What none of them could see was what was already beneath the surface. Nile crocodiles are ambush hunters that spend hours submerged and motionless, watching the banks with only their eyes and nostrils above the waterline. They do not chase. They wait until the distance closes to almost nothing, and then they move. The water around Janet showed no ripple, no warning. She was mid-stride when the crocodile exploded upward, its head and shoulders breaking the surface as its jaws locked onto her leg with a force that can exceed 2,000 pounds per square inch, enough to shatter bone in a fraction of a second. She screamed as she was wrenched sideways and pulled off her feet. The crocodile immediately began a death roll. This is not a behavior it learns. It is hardwired. The animal locks its jaws, drops its full body weight, and rotates violently to disorient and drown its target. Janet was spun underwater within seconds. Witnesses could see the surface churning, splashing hard, then going still. Her arms appeared above the waterline briefly, thrashing. But a crocodile's grip does not release during a roll. It tightens. She went fully beneath the surface. The water settled within moments and did not move again. The guide and passengers moved toward the bank, but there was nothing visible to reach. Emergency services were contacted immediately, but there was nothing to be done by the time anyone arrived. Janet Mills died that afternoon on the Zambezi River. Authorities determined her death resulted from traumatic injuries and drowning consistent with a crocodile attack. Investigators concluded she had entered a closed section of river and ignored direct instructions from her guide moments before entering the water. Several tourists had been recording when Janet waded in. That footage was reviewed by investigators. The family opposed its release. It has never been made public.
February 18th, 2017, a private game reserve in East Africa. 84 degrees, dry wind, and the kind of golden late afternoon light that Naomi Hart had traveled halfway around the world to shoot in. She had been chasing this exact hour for 4 days. She was about to find out it was not worth what it cost her. Naomi was 33, from Sydney, Australia. 4 years of safari and luxury travel content had built her a following most creators in that space would trade anything for. Her content stood out because of one thing: she always got closer than everyone else, more dramatic than anyone else was getting. She had chosen this specific reserve because its habituated lion population allowed approaches that government parks would never permit. That afternoon, the vehicle located a small group of lions resting about 35 yards off the track. The guide stopped the vehicle and turned off the engine to avoid disturbing them. What he could not immediately confirm from his position was that one of the lionesses was near a partially concealed impala carcass the pride had been feeding on for hours. And this is the part I want to make sure lands correctly. A habituated lion and a lion sitting next to a fresh kill are not the same animal. The tolerance that makes private reserves feel special disappears the moment food is involved. That conditional tolerance is not something that shows up in the marketing. Naomi photographed from the vehicle for about 20 minutes. Good shots, but the angle was elevated. She wanted ground level. The guide was in his seat, partly occupied with a radio update from camp. Guests had been briefed clearly at the start of the drive. Stay seated and do not exit in predator zones. Still, Naomi chose to step down onto the side step outside the doorframe anyway, camera raised, looking for the angle. The guide noticed and called out immediately. Naomi heard him, hesitated, and did not step back in, wishing to capture the perfect shot. That hesitation was enough. I still do not fully understand it. A single camera angle. That is what this came down to. She can still have the good shots without stepping down. But good was not enough, and that gap between good and perfect is the thing that keeps showing up in these stories. I do not say that to be harsh. I say it because it keeps being true, and nobody seems to be learning it fast enough. African lionesses weigh between 260 and 400 pounds and can reach speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Around an active kill, they become highly defensive. They do not always give extended warning. When a perceived threat crosses close enough to the food zone, the commitment can be almost instant. The nearest lioness had been watching Naomi from the moment she stepped outside the vehicle frame. She moved through the brush, low and fast, committing only when the distance closed. The lioness struck low and fast, hitting Naomi hard enough to knock her off balance and pull her down beside the track. She clamped onto her upper body as she went down, trying to maintain control of the hold. The guide reacted immediately, driving toward the scene with the horn sounding continuously. The sudden approach forced the lioness to break off and retreat into the brush. The entire sequence lasted only seconds from the moment of contact. Naomi was conscious when the guide reached her, but her breathing was severely compromised, with significant neck trauma, chest-crushing injuries, and damage consistent with airway compromise. Field care could not stabilize her condition, and she ultimately lost her life. Wildlife authorities classified the attack as defensive behavior around an active kill site. No action was taken against the lioness. The reserve reinforced its protocols around guest positioning during predator sightings. The vehicle's mounted camera captured partial footage of the encounter. It remained under restricted access during the investigation period and was not publicly released, with the reserve citing active legal proceedings as the reason no timeline for disclosure could be given. I have gone back and forth on this one, less than most, actually. The rule was clear: stay in the vehicle. Every reserve, every guide, every safety briefing says the same thing for the same reason. The rules exist because the animals do not make exceptions. And Naomi found that out the hardest way possible. The kill she did not know about changed the speed of the outcome. It did not change who made the decision. It was September 18th, 2018, in backcountry terrain near Glacier National Park, Montana. Early morning. The light was low and the air was cold. The ground was a mix of open meadow and dense forest, the kind of terrain that changes quickly between clear sightlines and thick cover. The park and surrounding land carry one of the highest grizzly densities in the contiguous United States. Larry Bennett, 29, was from Missoula and had spent multiple seasons traveling alone through backcountry wilderness in the region. He documented his trips on a vlog with approximately 7,200 followers. His content was grounded and detailed: trail conditions, navigation, wildlife sightings at a distance. He knew the terrain and moved through it with confidence built over years of solo travel. That experience was real. It shaped how he read situations and how much he trusted his own judgment when the signs were not obvious. And look, I want to be honest here. If you watch his earlier content before the subseries, it is genuinely good, careful, detailed, respectful of the environment. This was not always a reckless channel. That makes what came next harder to watch. Over time, his content shifted. He began a subseries he called The Long Approach. The premise was simple: locate a specific wild animal across multiple days and film it at progressively closer range. The subject he chose was a grizzly sow with 2 yearling cubs. He found her in the same general area across several outings and began tracking her movements, returning each day to film from a shorter distance than the day before. And this is where it starts to get deeply uncomfortable. Because the subseries had a name, he had planned it. Over 11 days, the distance closed from approximately 300 yards to 60 yards. Each session was filmed and uploaded. Each one showed him a little closer than the last. He narrated this progress as evidence that the animal was becoming accustomed to his presence, that the lack of a charge meant acceptance, that tolerance and habituation were the same thing. They are not. A grizzly that does not charge is not a grizzly that has accepted a human. A sow with yearling cubs operates under a different set of pressures than a solitary bear. She is not assessing whether a nearby human is a threat to herself alone. She is assessing whether it is a threat to her cubs. I actually spent 3 hours going through wildlife research specifically on sow behavior for this case, and what I found is that a sow with cubs does not give you signals the way a solitary bear does. She waits, and then she does not. Larry had been watching the same bear for 11 days and had not been charged. That history became the basis of his confidence. Because nothing had happened yet, he treated it as evidence that nothing would happen. This is a common and dangerous pattern. Each time he closed distance, he moved the threshold closer to where he was standing. What gets me about that logic is how completely reasonable it sounds from the inside. 11 days, no charge. Of course he felt safe. The bear had never given him a reason not to. On the 12th day, he returned to the same area and closed the distance further. At approximately 40 yards, he was still filming. The sow was present with her cubs. At 40 yards, a grizzly bear covers the distance to a human in under 3 seconds. There is no time to deploy bear spray at that range if the charge has already begun. There is no safe direction to move. The terrain at that distance does not offer cover. That means anything against an animal of that speed and weight. And this is the moment everything that had been building for 11 days came to its conclusion. The sow charged. The initial impact was from the full force of the animal's body weight moving at speed. The contact that followed included biting and clawing, consistent with a defensive encounter, not a predatory one. A defensive grizzly attack is not an attempt to kill and consume. It is an attempt to neutralize a perceived threat. The animal attacks until it determines the threat is gone, then disengages. The injuries produced in that time are severe, regardless of the animal's intent. The duration was brief. When the bear disengaged, Larry was on the ground. He was alive. He attempted to move and covered approximately 200 meters from the point of contact before he could not continue. Search teams were deployed after he failed to return and could not be contacted. He was located in backcountry terrain several hours later, approximately 200 meters from the point of initial contact. Responders reached him on foot and initiated assessment, but he was unresponsive with no detectable pulse. Due to the extent of blood loss and the time elapsed, resuscitation was not possible. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Clinical assessment determined the cause of death to be exsanguination resulting from traumatic injuries sustained in a grizzly bear attack. Wildlife officials investigated the area and confirmed the presence of a sow with cubs. The attack was classified as defensive behavior. The bear was not euthanized, as no ongoing threat to the public was identified. The area was temporarily closed as a precaution. Larry's scheduled content was taken offline, and his family held a service in Missoula. And the part that stays with me about Larry Bennett, the detail I cannot move past, is that scheduled video going live while he was dying out there. His audience was watching old footage of him getting closer to that bear while he was already gone. That is the part that keeps me up. It was July 14, 2018, on the southern edge of a mangrove lagoon outside Tulum, Quintana Roo, Mexico. Brown water, tangled roots, and a crocodile that had been hand-fed by locals for weeks, and a 24-year-old woman who had promised her followers she would jump on it. Valeria Cruz was a TikToker who had been living near the Riviera Maya for 8 months, posting reef wading, shark approach dives, and hand-feeding clips. 3 weeks before the lagoon trip, she told followers during a live session that if a crocodile video hit 1,000 likes, she would come back and wrestle one. It hit over that in under 2 days. She announced the follow-up 4 days later. Her camera operator, Danny, told authorities that Valeria had scouted the location twice the week before filming. Locals had been bait feeding a mid-sized Morlaix crocodile near the bank long enough that the animal associated that ledge with food. Valeria had filmed this on a prior visit and posted it as a teaser clip. Now, I think it's good that there had been planning happening beforehand, but a crocodile is a crocodile. Sometimes, just use common sense. Morlaix crocodiles are endemic to Central America and southern Mexico, typically reaching 6.5 to 9.8 feet in length and weighing between 100 and 400 pounds in mature adults. Their bite force exceeds 2,000 pounds per square inch in larger individuals. Their response to close-range physical contact is not a decision, it is a reflex. 2 fishermen working a channel roughly 90 feet away had already moved their boat further down the waterway that morning. One later told local media the animal had been oriented near the bank for over an hour in the same posture it held when bait was thrown. A hand-painted sign at the access point, placed by a local conservation group, present for at least 2 years, warned in both Spanish and English against approaching or feeding crocodiles. Still, Valeria stepped around it to reach the ledge. Danny was filming from a flat-bottom boat, roughly 15 feet offshore. According to witness accounts, Valeria was at the ledge for approximately 40 seconds before she stepped off into the shallow water directly beside the crocodile as it surfaced. The crocodile was less than 5 feet below when she made contact. The animal did not pause. Its jaws closed around her right forearm in the same motion as the roll, a full lateral snap with no interval between contact and bite. The grip locked immediately. She screamed twice. Both sounds were cut short. The animal drove into a death roll, its full body rotating and pulling her sideways off the ledge and into the water. Danny said that the scene became rapidly obscured by splashing and sediment, preventing any clear visual confirmation of injury severity in real time. She went under still audibly screaming. The sound stopped when the water closed over her. The footage shows the surface disturbing in 2 separate locations within seconds. A brief secondary surface disturbance was visible nearby, but it was not clearly identifiable due to turbulence and low water visibility. The surface did not break again. Danny screamed from the boat. The 2 fishermen moved toward the bank within minutes, but did not enter the water. At least 2 additional crocodiles were visible near the far bank. Emergency services were contacted, but the recovery of the body was not completed for nearly 4 hours. She had no way to survive for that long. Ultimately, her death attributed to traumatic hemorrhage and drowning secondary to crocodile attack. Near complete degloving and crush fracture of the right forearm, consistent with high force bite and rotational trauma. Secondary bite injuries to the left shoulder and thorax. Death ruled accidental. Some things are just blatantly stupid, and this is one of them. Valeria Cruz did not stumble into that lagoon. She scouted it, announced it publicly, and jumped in front of a camera because a number on a screen told her to. The sign was there. The fishermen had already moved. The animal had been conditioned to respond to anything near that bank. None of it was hidden. Common sense is not complicated. It just requires someone willing to use it more than they want the content. It was Friday, July 5th, 2018, in Tucson, Arizona. The sun was setting over the desert and the air was very hot. Inside a small apartment, the air conditioner was humming. Ashley Marco was 24 years old. She was a person who loved reptiles more than anything else. She had a TikTok account with about 3,400 followers. She spent most of her time filming her snakes. Ashley had 14 snakes in her apartment. She had ball pythons, corn snakes, and a beautiful rainbow boa. She had a tattoo on her arm of a king cobra. She called the tattoo the crown. Most of her snakes were not venomous. This means their bite would hurt, but it would not kill you, because she handled these snakes every day. She became very brave. I want to say something here. 14 snakes, and not one of them had ever seriously hurt her. That kind of track record will make anyone feel untouchable. She would hold them with her bare hands while the camera was recording. For many months, Ashley had a dream. She wanted a king cobra. This was the snake she had always wanted. King cobras are known for being highly reactive and difficult to handle safely. Finally, she found a seller. She paid $1,800 for a young male king cobra. It was about 5 feet long. Ashley was at a pool party with her friends when she got a message. The snake had arrived at her home. She was so excited that she left the party immediately. She drove home fast. She wanted to show the world her new snake. Keeping venomous snakes legally in Arizona can involve permits and local restrictions. The snake was sent to her in a box. It traveled for 18 hours. During this time, the snake was tossed around in a dark box. It was stressed from the travel. In her older videos, Ashley told her fans that you should never touch a venomous snake right after it arrives. She said they need days to calm down. But on this Friday, she did not follow her own advice. Ashley did not have an emergency plan. She only had her phone and her ring light. At 9:42 p.m., she turned on her live stream. About 61 people joined to watch. She was smiling and full of energy. She set up her phone so everyone could see the enclosure. She talked about how happy she was. Then, she opened the shipping container. As soon as the lid opened, the cobra emerged and stood up. It spread its wide hood and stayed in a defensive position. Ashley did not move back. She used a metal hook to move the snake, but she stayed very close. She told her viewers that the snake was just being spicy. In the chat, people started to get worried. They typed messages asking her to be careful. Ashley laughed it off. 61 people watching her laugh off a king cobra strike. I genuinely didn't know whether to be more stunned by the bite or by what she did right after. As she adjusted the hook and shifted her attention toward the live stream comments, the cobra rotated suddenly and struck before she could reposition safely. The cobra bit her on the base of her left thumb. Ashley jumped back and made a sharp sound. She quickly put the snake back in its cage and closed the door. She picked up a towel she had brought from the pool party and wrapped it around her hand. She looked at the camera and tried to act like it was no big deal. She laughed nervously and told the stream she had probably just been tagged. She checked the bite. It was not swelling much. She told her followers it might be a dry bite. A dry bite is when a snake bites, but chooses not to use its venom. Venom is expensive for a snake to make, so they sometimes save it for their food instead of using it for defense. She continued talking to the live stream for several more minutes, trying to stay calm for her audience. At first, Ashley thought she had gotten lucky, but over the next 20 to 30 minutes, she started sweating heavily. Her jaw felt strange. Then her eyelids became difficult to keep open. This type of venom is called a neurotoxin. It attacks the nerves and tells the muscles to stop working. Her words became slow and blurry. She tried to stand up, but her legs felt like jelly. She sat back down heavily. The people watching the live stream knew something was wrong. They urged her to call 911 immediately. Ashley kept insisting she could still breathe. One viewer contacted emergency dispatch in Tucson, but nobody knew her exact apartment number. This caused a delay while responders tried to find her. On the screen, Ashley was struggling for air. It felt like a heavy weight was sitting on her chest. When the paramedics finally arrived, the ring light was still on. They found Ashley on the floor. By the time she reached the hospital, she was in severe respiratory failure. Doctors placed her on a ventilator to help her breathe. Poison control specialists worked to find king cobra anti-venom from exotic animal networks and zoos. Because king cobras are from Asia, the medicine was not easy to find nearby. By the time anti-venom arrangements were underway, the venom had already caused severe respiratory paralysis. Ashley Marco died early the next morning. She was 24 years old. The cause of death was recorded as fatal neurotoxic envenomation. The next day, wildlife authorities came to the apartment. They took the king cobra and the other snakes away. Investigators later examined whether she had the required permits and authorizations to keep the cobra. Footage of the incident was removed to discourage people from doing such stunts.
It was the afternoon of September 7th, 2018, at a tiger park near Pattaya, Thailand. Tourists visited the attraction to see tigers up close and take photographs under staff supervision. Leverett Julian was 39 years old and lived in Birmingham, England. He worked as a freelance graphic designer and spent most of his time working from home. For several years, he struggled to find steady clients and often worried about money. In early 2018, everything changed when he landed the biggest client of his career. The contract brought in more money than he had ever earned. And after his first major payment, Leverett decided to reward himself with a vacation. One of the places that interested him most was a tiger attraction where visitors could photograph large cats. On September 7th, Leverett arrived and joined a guided visitor group. Before entering the tiger area, staff explained the rules. Visitors were told to remain with handlers at all times and never approach animals without permission. The tigers were powerful predators, and the safety procedures existed for a reason. Leverett listened, but seemed distracted by the photographs he wanted to get. He had told people before the trip that he wanted shots. Nobody else would have something that looked like it came from a nature documentary rather than a tourist attraction. The visit went smoothly. He took many pictures from the allowed distances, but kept looking back toward the enclosures as if he wanted closer angles. And I recognize that feeling. You're standing there with a camera, and the shot you want is just a few feet further than you're allowed to go. Most people would accept that and move on. Leverett couldn't. When guests were directed toward the exit, Leverett did not leave. He stayed behind near one of the fenced areas while staff focused on another group. He found a maintenance gate that had not been properly latched after equipment was moved through earlier in the day, pushed it open, and slipped into the staff corridor beyond. He moved along it until he reached a secondary barrier beside one of the tiger habitats. Rather than stopping there, he leaned in close and raised his camera, trying to frame the animal through the gap. The tiger was resting about 15 feet away. It had been calm all afternoon, but tigers are not domesticated animals. The appearance of calm does not mean what people assume it means. When the tiger registered an unrecognized figure in a space where humans were not supposed to be, something shifted. Its ears went flat, its eyes locked onto Leverett. It rose slowly to its feet. Leverett may not have understood what those signals meant. He kept the camera up. An adult male tiger can weigh over 500 pounds and reach speeds approaching 40 miles per hour. The distance between the tiger and the barrier closed in under 2 seconds. As Leverett leaned closer, the tiger struck through the gap and seized his arm, pulling him with great effort. And before he could pull back, he was close enough that its jaws found his neck and upper torso. The grip of a tiger's bite is designed to crush the cervical vertebrae of large prey. He screamed and was dragged repeatedly against the barrier as the animal pulled and shook him. He tried to brace against the wall, but could not create enough leverage to pull free. The claws raked down his side and back with each motion. Emergency procedures were activated immediately. Staff rushed to the scene and contacted emergency services. Despite their efforts, Leverett Julian died from injuries sustained during the attack. Investigators determined he had passed through an unsecured gate and placed himself against a tiger enclosure without supervision. Security camera footage from the facility documented parts of what happened in the staff corridor. That footage was submitted to investigators and sealed as part of the inquiry. The park declined all media requests, citing the ongoing legal proceedings and the family's request for privacy. It has not been released publicly.